Now that the High Court has overturned federally guaranteed access to abortion, states begin the process of governing the issue according to their own laws. In the state of Georgia, in 2019, the legislature passed the Georgia Life Law, which puts in place a ban after 6 weeks or when a heartbeat is detected. But it was held up in court until now. But now Governor Kemp says he believes it will go into effect soon. Joining us now, Georgia Democrat Stacey Abrams, who is running against Governor Kemp this November. Ms. Abrams, welcome to Fox News Sunday. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
So with regard to that law, I know that you said that you were appalled by the outcome of the court's decision. But given the law that was voted in by the legislature in Georgia, do you support the fact that they will carry out the will of the people in Georgia and put that law at a 6-week ban into effect?
I do not. And I would reject the notion that this is the will of the people. This was a political decision made by the narrowest of margins and done to satisfy an even narrower constituency. The majority of Georgians rejected the notion of overturning Roe v. Wade. They reject this bill, and this is not the law that will be safest for Georgia women. What is more concerning to me, though, is the notion that our constitutional rights and the bodily autonomy that women for 50 years have come to rely on will now be subject to state-by-state imprimatur, rather than being governed by a federal notion that no matter who you are, no matter where you live, we live in the United States, and our ability to control our bodies should be sacrosanct regardless of state lines.
So we are seeing in different states that there will be different limitations based on when people would be able to get an abortion. Do you support any limitation on abortion, or do you think that women should have the right to have an abortion all the way up to 9 months?
I believe an abortion is a medical decision, and I believe that that should be a choice made between a doctor and a woman and in consultation with her family. But I think the challenge that we have is that we keep putting this in a political space. This is a medical decision, and the medical choices that should be made should be governed by what is best for that woman and what is best at the suggestion of and advice of their doctor.
But so you used to be pro-life, and you say that you then converted to being pro-choice. You know, you say it's a medical decision. A lot of people would disagree with that. A lot of people would say it's a decision about life and respecting life. I want to play this soundbite for you from another woman in leadership. This is Virginia Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears, and she's talking in this soundbite about the situation in Virginia, and I want to get your thoughts on it on the other side.
2019, 15,000 plus abortions were done. 46% of them were done by black women. Now, if the KKK had said we will pay for every black woman to have an abortion who wants one, we would say to ourselves, wait a minute, something's up. Why don't they want us to have our babies? But you see that we don't understand what's going on, and so we're losing so many black lives that matter.
Do you think that she has a point in terms of losing so many black lives that matter? I've heard that sentiment from other people as well.
I think that's a very specious argument that's used to cloak what is, I think, a deeply disturbing approach to this conversation. In fact, during my tenure in the legislature, I beat back a bill that was designed to deny access to this medical decision using race as a divisive tactic. And I reject that. Black women in Georgia face the highest maternal mortality rate. They're 3 times more likely to die. We know that black women are the most likely to be underserved by their medical care. And we know that sometimes the choice that they need to make medically, economically, and personally is to have an abortion. If Lieutenant Governor Sears or others want to address the racial dimensions, then we have to address all of the racial dimensions. The likelihood of black women being underpaid, the likelihood of black women living in broken public health infrastructures, the likelihood of them not having access to Medicaid and not having access to insurance, which tends to lead to worse pregnancies and worse outcomes. We cannot cherry pick when we pay attention to the lives and safety of women, and that is the deepest challenge that we face here in Georgia.
But what about the lives and safety? What about the lives and safety of the child?
Brian Kemp has refused to expand Medicaid in the state of Georgia. He has refused to support women at every stage of their lives when they are trying to make the best choices for themselves and their families. And the reality is, if we care about the medical needs of women, especially black women, then we have to care the entire time.
I understood, but I'm just asking you, I asked you about when you see, I asked you if you believe in it all the way up to 9 months. So I'm just asking you, you're talking about caring about the lives of women. I'm just asking, at what point do you start to care about the life of that baby girl in some cases?
What I would say is that it is a medical decision. I don't know of a single woman who reaches the stage where this decision is easy. That is not the case. And so this is a medical conversation. And while we are absolutely compelled to have these difficult conversations, they should not be political ones. I should not be making decisions without having true understanding of the facts, and nor should any other political leader. This is not a political issue.
So I'm going to take that as up to 9 months in some cases, depending on the woman. Correct?
That is not what I said. I said this is a medical decision, and the medical decisions that have to be made in context. This is a specious approach to try to denude the entire argument. And the reality is, abortion and reproductive care is personal, and it is singular, and it should be made between a woman and her doctor. I do not have either the experience or the capacity to know what is happening with others.
Okay, I want to move on. We could talk about this a lot longer, I'm sure, but I want to ask you a little bit about this recent headline in an interview that you did with Axios, and the title is "Stacey Abrams Wants to Fund the Police." So what would you say to those who look at that headline and hear you calling for an increase for pay to certain law enforcement, that this is election politics and that this is a change of tune, given this soundbite from an interview that you did with CNN that is now part of an ad that your opponent has put out there, I should point out. Let's watch.
Listen to Stacey Abrams on defunding the police.
So yes to some defunding.
We have to reallocate resources, so yes.
So what's your reaction to that? And do you believe that you've changed your tune on defunding the police?
No, because if you listen to the whole clip, which Brian Kemp conveniently leaves out, I said if the choice is between the murder of black people and serving black people, then certainly. But I don't think that's where we are, and I don't think that's where we have to be. My intent is to balance public safety and justice, because doing otherwise has never worked. We cannot punish our way into public safety. But we also have to recognize that there are deep challenges in how law enforcement engages our communities, and that is why I'm pushing both for public safety measures, accountability measures, and criminal justice reform measures. What I believe most fundamentally, and this is true if you look at my entire record, is that living wages have to be paid, especially to our public workers, especially to law enforcement. And in the state of Georgia, if you're a correctional officer, you make $39,000. If you're a community supervisor, that is someone who deals with probation and parole, and Georgia has the highest rate in the nation, you make $39,000. If you're a trooper cadet, you make a little over $40,000.
Understood.
We need to pay a living wage in Georgia, and that is what my proposal says.
And
pay
I know
a living wage to our public safety workers, just as I want to pay to our teachers.
Okay.
$50,000, because that's the right thing to do.
Your opponent has also called and implemented for pay raises for members of law enforcement. But that aside, in terms of the defund the police movement, would you say, looking back at it, that it caused damage, what we saw was a mass leaving of office of police officers across the country? We saw an increase in homicide rates, 19% in Atlanta, 55% last year. Do you think it was a mistake to defund the police, to have this movement across the country?
The intention that we had in 2020 was to call attention to the harm that was being done to black people by the police. We had a litany of murders that shocked the conscience of every American. But let's be clear, in the state of Georgia, Violent crime went up 55% in 2019 to 2020 under Brian Kemp. It had nothing to do with the reaction to George Floyd's murder, to Rayshard Brooks's murder, to Ahmaud Arbery's murder, to Breonna Taylor's murder. It happened under Brian Kemp's leadership. It happened under a president and a governor who believed that punishment rather than a balanced approach was the answer. We know that has never worked, that we have to have both public safety and justice. And that's simply the intention that I have. Let us invest in our public safety workers. Let us invest in making certain that our communities are served, that we center the well-being of our communities, that we think about their health care, we think about their safety, and we think about those who are providing that safety. I want us to have the best law enforcement possible to protect our communities, but they also have to be held accountable, and we can do both and. It is a false choice to say that we have to do one or the other.
But many look at that movement and say that it backfired, that it led to an exodus of police, as I mentioned, that you'd have seen an increase in homicides, specifically in many cities across the country, that a lot of people who get arrested are back out on the street the next day. This is a dangerous movement that has led to a lot of violence and unrest in cities across the country. Do you disagree?
I am pointing to the data that is in Georgia, and we saw the largest increase in violent crime preceding that conversation that happened after George Floyd was murdered, after Ahmaud Arbery was murdered. Let's be clear. Georgia was facing a rise in assaults, a rise in violence crime. We're going to face a rise in gun violence because we have a governor who has weakened gun laws and allowed dangerous people to carry weapons without a permit, without a background check. And so I think it is very convenient to try to attach this to one moment that is insufficient in terms of its data and in terms of its outcome. But we know in Georgia, the number of people leaving law enforcement often cite pay. They cite pay, they cite morale, and that's because they are not feeling completely supported by our governor and by our leadership. They need the ability to take care of themselves and their families, and we have law enforcement officers, especially at the local level, who are on food stamps because we are not doing our job to provide a living wage for those we ask to do a difficult job.
Well, we certainly have seen a dip in morale across the country in police, and I think a lot of them would attribute it to movements to try to diminish their job and to try to put them in a light that many of them felt they didn't deserve. Before I let you go, though, I want to ask you one more question, and it's about President Biden. His approval numbers are at 39%. Obviously, we have soaring inflation. We've got gas prices that are putting a real dent in people's wallets across the country. Will you be asking the president to campaign with you in Georgia in the governor's race against Governor Kemp?
I welcome anyone who wants to come to Georgia to help improve the lives of Georgians, and that includes the President of the United States. But more importantly, I invite people to go to my website at StaceyAbrams.com to learn about my plans for Georgia. This is a state race. This is a race about the future of Georgia, one Georgia, where we treat our public workers, public safety workers, our teachers, anyone who should be doing their best for our communities, deserve the best from our government. And please go to my website at StaceyAbrams.com to learn more about my plans for one Georgia.
All right. We look forward to the conversation. We appreciate you being here today. Stacey Abrams, we hope we'll have a chance to talk to you in the future more about this important race in for the governor's office in Georgia. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.